It has started. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and good morning, Matthew, and thanks again for being part of this session. I think we can start. Once again, please keep your microphone muted and webcam off. And if you have any question, please mention them in the chat. And now I'm going to hand it over to Matthew. You ready?
I am ready, and just a quick confirmation that you can see my screen and hear me clearly. Are we good to go?
Definitely all clear, all good.
Beautiful. Well, let me say, first of all, thank you to the organizers and the sponsors and the whole French and European data community for making this event possible. Really happy to be here, especially happy to see so many people attending at the end of the day. It's early morning, it's 7 o'clock here on the West Coast in the US, but I appreciate that everyone has had a long day. Hopefully, this content will be both useful and a good capstone for all of the other more feature and technology-centric content that you've consumed or sessions that you've attended during the day, and it will be a good way to wrap up the event for you. So for a little bit of introduction, I want to say a few words about myself. So my name is Matthew Roach. I'm a program manager on the Power BI customer advisory team at Microsoft. And in this current role, most of what I do is working with some of the biggest Power BI customers in the world, like organizations that have tens of thousands of users every month on Power BI, and both learn from them so that we can make Power BI better and also help them be successful so that they can do more with Power BI today. I've been in this role for a little bit over 3 years. Before that, I was a program manager on a variety of SQL Server and Azure-based data and information management products from Microsoft. And before I joined Microsoft in 2008, I was a SQL Server Integration Services MVP, and I worked as a trainer, a mentor, a data architect, a developer. Been doing data stuff for about 25 years now, which it just blows my mind to say that out loud. But I've gotten to see a lot of evolution in how people and how organizations work with data over these 25 years. And this is really where I want to start. Before we dig into the data culture side of things, I want to provide a brief, like 3-minute, 5-minute history of business intelligence so that we all have the same context when we're thinking about and talking about some of the challenges in building a data culture. Now, back in the 80s or 70s, 80s, early 90s, it was interesting and new and exciting to have computer-driven business processes, to have an application or a program to handle sales, to handle inventory, to handle supply chain. And as soon as we had data, there was a need for reporting, dashboards, scorecards, the visualizations to let business stakeholders make more informed and better informed decisions based on the data that was available. As time progressed, there were more and more of these systems producing more and more data, which in turn drove the need for more and more reports and dashboards. And I'm going to ask whoever the moderator is, if you could please stay on top of the attendees to keep them muted. I am getting a lot of background noise on my microphone. Not sure if it's disturbing the others as well. So
Definitely.
I'll rely on you to stay on top of that. Thank you. So business intelligence and the way that we work with data is evolving. The data warehouse pattern, whether it's a relational data warehouse or a more modern technology implementation like a data lake or a data lakehouse pattern, basically the end-to-end architecture evolved to have this central place where data could be aggregated, consolidated, staged, cleansed, enriched, and made available for downstream applications. This introduced the need for a data preparation or ETL tier, the tools, technologies, and processes to get the data from all of those upstream locations into that one central downstream data warehouse or data mart, or likely a collection of them over time. And then as more and more people and more organizations needed to do things like interacting with the data on a more regular basis, slicing and dicing and so on, the need for an in-memory analytics optimized data model, these OLAP solutions, whether it's a cube or tabular model or whatever the technology happens to be, this was necessary to get over the technical limitations of the relational database for lots and lots of concurrent users and multiple workloads. And if we think about this broad end-to-end, this is what a lot of BI applications look like today in 2021, but it's also what they looked like 20 or 25 years ago. There's really nothing new under the sun here. There's lots of details that are different, but the big picture architecture is very often the same. The thing that has changed most significantly over the last 20 years is the emergence of self-service business intelligence. Without self-service BI, every single piece of this picture needs to be developed, maintained, and managed by some sort of expert, like technical expert, whether it's a developer, a data engineer, whatever the job title is. All of these pieces were built by this really specialized, highly expensive person who doesn't really know the business very well. And by having the ability, like in the first generation self-service BI tools, having the ability for a less technical person build a report or then build a data model. And with Power BI today, we basically have this whole end-to-end stack, whether it's Power Query and data flows and data sets and reporting and visualization and dashboards. Every part of this end-to-end solution could be built by a business user who is really, really informed on the problem domain that they're trying to solve, and they know just enough to get by in the solution domain, which is the technology that they're applying for it. And this is where we are today, where there are capabilities at every part of this end-to-end data supply chain or data value chain that could be built by someone in a central BI team, often in IT, or they could be built by a business user in finance or sales or HR. And the reason why this is so important as we're bridging from the history of BI into talking about a data culture is once you have the ability for just about anyone to contribute in just about any way, having the norms and having the expectations that people will do this in the right way, at the right time, with the right data, this becomes one of the biggest emerging problems. So before we talk specifically about data culture, let's talk about cultures in general. And as you can see on the slide, I Googled or went to DuckDuckGo, which is my search engine of choice. I typed in define culture. This is what came back. I took a screenshot. So like public domain information. But a culture is that set of beliefs, customs, behaviors, and so on that are common across a group of people. And if you think about the cultures of a country, it's often made up of the politics and the history, the art, the music, the food. All of these things make France distinct from Italy, distinct from Germany, distinct from the US. And there's no one thing that makes a culture what it is. The culture is this collection of what people do and all of the influences that go into bringing them together to make that culture unique and distinct. And it's always evolving over time. And then when we go from this general broad description of culture and we start looking at data culture, those same broad strokes apply. So the same characteristics, it is what is encouraged and rewarded. It is what is discouraged and punished. It is what people do every day because this is what the culture recognizes. Those things now apply to how people work with data. And in a data culture, it's really about more people working with the right data at the right time in more places, part of more business processes, so that the decisions that the people across the organization are making are based on this known, trusted, managed data. And the people in the business groups where typically they're the ones that they need something right now, they can't wait on IT. IT used to be the bottleneck. Now they are empowered. The data that they need is available. the training and the skills and the resources that they need to work with it are available and discoverable. And this allows those specialized, expensive resources to focus on the things that they're best at, which is often the big picture architecture, the scale, the security, the performance, and both IT and business work in partnership. This is really the key here for a data culture where they work in partnership towards these shared goals. And the presence of shared goals brings us to perhaps the single most important factor for success, which is having an engaged executive sponsor. And I'm going to have my little mic drop moment here. Hopefully the animation will work across screen sharing. But without an executive sponsor, your efforts to build a data culture are doomed to failure. And they might fail right away. It might be that you try really, really hard and you just never get anywhere. Or it could be that you try really, really hard and it works, but it's always this constant work. It's constant effort to keep these things going because nobody else seems to believe in it as much as you do. And then when you burn out or you change your job role or you move to another organization, all of the things that you built, all of the progress that you made to get closer to the goal of the data culture, those things will fail and die when you leave and you stop putting that effort in, because the executive sponsor typically defines the scope of the data culture. Ideally, that executive will be someone that has chief at the top of their job title. So chief executive, chief data officer, chief finance officer. It's someone that with this broad authority, because the executive sponsor is the person who is always talking from the top-down position of authority, recognizing the great work that people are doing, helping unblock efforts. They are the person that you can escalate to when someone isn't participating. You know, this is often where the politics side of data culture comes in. But without that executive sponsor to help you with your efforts, if you're driving this from a bottom-up perspective, you can make some progress, but you can't really succeed from a strategic perspective. So with all of this said, we've got a great set of context established. The rest of, or most of the rest of the session is broken down into the easy part and the hard part. We're going to start with the easy part, and the easy part is technology. And I'm going to assume that if you're attending this session, it's like it's a weekend. You've invested your weekend day into attending an event around Power Platform, Power BI, and data-related topics, that you're probably a technical person who is used to working with the technology side of things. And the reality is that most of us as technologists work with business stakeholders to enable them, to empower them, to keep them from messing things up. But at the same time, those business stakeholders are working with us because they need to achieve their goals on their timelines, and they're relying on us to be part of the solution, not getting in their way. And many organizations, when they think about the governance aspect of building a data culture, we want the right people working with the right data in the right ways. A lot of organizations say, wait, I'm not really comfortable with everybody having access to all of this data. What if they do something bad, right? So they lock things down. What they don't recognize, or I'm not sure how they can't recognize it, because it literally happens every single time. If you lock down the official way, the supported way for business users to get to the data that they need, they will find another way to get to the data that they need because they need it. They will develop a shadow BI solution, based on Excel, based on Access, based on SharePoint lists. They might have Power BI in there somewhere, but basically, if the data organization, which is often owned by IT, doesn't provide the right flexibility for the business users that need that data, information, and reports to solve their problems, and make it easier to work with things the right way than it is to go around and work with that data the wrong way, if we don't take those steps, we can't proceed. And a lot of this comes down to, or a lot of the actions that we take come down to deciding, what do we control more or govern more, and what do we control less and govern less? And the key requirement, or the key strategic takeaway here, is that there need to be consistent criteria and responsibilities that are defined in advance, and they can be refined over time, but everybody needs to agree that these are things, like, look down at the bottom of our pyramid here. These are the things like personal reporting or team or project-based reporting that we don't need to control as much. Business is going to build them. IT might have oversight over them, but for the most part, we just want people to do what they want to do. The risk is lower, and there's many more solutions that fall into these broader buckets. But if we look up at the top of the pyramid, where we have the enterprise data warehouse, if we have data that is being included in public financial disclosures, where there's like strict regulatory compliance requirements, those are probably things that we want to have very tight controls over, to make sure not only that only the specialized group of experts are modifying and managing the data, but that we have a very solid understanding of who is using the data in what way. But we can't apply a one-size-fits-all approach to everything, because there's so much variation. And honestly, where that red line, where the consistent criteria and responsibilities are applied, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there is a line, that everyone who needs to have a say in defining where the line goes, that they have that say, so that no one can come back and argue with it later, and that the line is communicated so that everybody who wants to work with data, that they understand what is permitted, what is encouraged, and what is not allowed. This is very often what we mean when we talk about using guardrails. So we want people to drive down this one particular road, so we put guardrails up on either side. It's still possible that someone might drive off the road. We can't control every eventuality, but we can make it so that it's easier to work with data the way that we should work with it than it is to work with it in other ways. And during my introduction, I mentioned briefly that in my current role, I work with these giant Power BI customers. So I've had in-depth conversations with literally hundreds of product owners, so the people in the business and IT groups inside these giant multinational corporations that are responsible for adopting, managing, supporting, and driving usage of Power BI across their organizations. And in those hundreds of conversations, I've seen patterns emerge. And the pattern that I'm describing here is my view, or my anonymization of what dozens of these giant customers have told me, and that is that they break their Power BI applications down into typically 4 different rings or levels. At the outermost side, we've got personal reporting, where anybody can work with whatever data they have. They have Power BI Desktop, they might have Excel. They may not be able to share in Power BI as a service. They can put things in their My Workspace, but not share more broadly, but everybody can work with data. Then there is another level where the users have a business case for sharing data with a small group, where typically they'll give a pro license to all of the readers and all of the authors, and it's really this unmanaged or minimally managed use case where a set of business experts will build and work with or build reports, build Power BI solutions, and then work with the solutions that their peers have built. It's small scale, it's informal, it's minimally managed. When we get down into the department level BI, this is often where there is a need to share a given report or app with a broader number of consumers. And as the scope of the audience increases, the risk inherent in the misuse of data or the misapplication of data increases. So this is often where the central BI team which is often in IT or possibly in the center of excellence, that this team has more oversight and more direct hands-on engagement. It's very common that these departmental apps are deployed into Power BI premium capacities to take advantage of the scope of distribution. And because of that, it's common for that central BI team to then have gates and checks as these applications are being deployed. So if you're going to deploy your application into premium, you have to submit your PBIX, your documentation, all of the information that they need so that the expert technology team can then go in and look at best practices and performance and visual consistency and things along those lines based on the criteria that have been set for that type of application. And then at the center of this diagram, we have traditional enterprise BI. So this is the type of developed by IT, tightly managed, tightly maintained, and distributed to large, important audiences across the organization. It's the BI that we've always had. It's just being developed in Power BI, but they've got the full end-to-end support. They've got application lifecycle management, so DevOps and data ops as part of it. And all of these relate to each other, but they're all managed differently because they have different requirements. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Now, the previous slide had a generic version of this four-ring model. So basically, this is my way to summarize what I've heard from lots of different customers. The slide that we have here is the same diagram, but with different labels, with different words on it. And this is coming from one specific customer, a customer in the retail space, where in my conversation with their leader, he basically described these four rings. And if you think about retail, where we have hundreds of diverse employees in each store, where we might have hundreds or thousands of stores across the world, this organization has put data into the hands of every employee. So whether they're a stock boy, a cashier, a department manager, a store manager, a district manager, or someone at headquarters, anybody can connect to data that has been made available to them because there are shared data sets that have been created, curated, and delivered, so that if I were a stock boy and I wanted more insight into the data for the stuff that I was stocking, I could connect to the service, work with existing reports, and customize them there. If I were a user, and I'm gonna pick the meat department or butcher department here, and keep in mind as well, I do understand that the food cultures between the U.S. And France are very, very different. So think giant superstore that also has produce and meat and so on, not the delightful specialty foods that you might be thinking of when you think of the butcher. But there are some departments where their data needs are different because their the business that's being managed, the actual real world physical processes that the data represents are different. And the fact that fresh food has very limited life cycle, different production cycles, and other characteristics that are meaningfully different than like dry goods or like paper towels or things like that. The users that work in these departments, they have more data, they're given more support and resources because it's more important for them. This organization also has power users that they enable they enable with more training, build their skills. They give them better tools, like they might have Tabular Editor in addition to Power BI Desktop, and they've got tighter relationships with the people in the BI and IT group, basically to make it so that in those key departments, they have these champions or power users that are there to do the things that the other business users may not be able to do. And then at the very beginning that central BI or enterprise BI, this one particular customer representative called this their hardcore IT. We've already talked about that. So instead of saying the same thing again, I actually want to double click on that hardcore IT, because this customer, the reason I want to showcase them is they have this really well-defined process about how you go from one ring to another. And for going from end users to the key departments to the power users, this is much less formal. So this is sort of the organic promotion. But for handing off an application that was developed by business, to have it part of that portfolio that is managed by the central IT team that's doing BI, they have these well-defined requirements for how the handoff will take place and how they decide whether or not it fits into this more managed part of their data estate. And as with the previous pattern, this is something that I hear successful customers doing over and over and over again. I'm just focusing on this one because it's in scope and it's very well defined. So this BI team has office hours. So twice per week, it's sometimes physical, sometimes virtual, but the power users and other business users can come in to ask questions, to get information, to do code development or brainstorming. But part of this is the power user that has developed a BI solution, they could come in and say, I want to hand this off to have it operationalized. That starts a process that begins with exploration. Here, someone from the center of excellence and the business user, they will work together to prove out the ideas, to basically validate that it has enough scope of interest or scope of impact to make sense for IT to maintain. Not every app moves on, but during this exploration period, which is typically a week or two, during this exploration period, the business and IT people will collaborate and work together in Power BI Desktop or Excel to understand what's there, to understand the context, and decide, does it meet the bar to keep going up this ladder? And if it does, they will promote it. The promotion phase is where they will set up a data source on the gateway, they'll get a scheduled refresh going, and they'll start with the visual standardization. They'll apply corporate colors and theming and make sure that it looks like an official report. And at this point, an application might stop there. If they don't have the broad enough reach or a stable and standardized enough data source, it might not fit into IT priorities. So it may be that as the output of the collaboration between business and IT, this application, it's now more stable, it's published, and it's got the gateway with the scheduled refresh, and it looks better and more consistent, but it ends there. It's still owned and maintained by the business owner that developed it initially. That's fine. But if it does make sense, if the reach and the scale and the impact are important enough that IT should own it, the next step, they will get the data sources into a location that IT can manage, because very often there will be things like Excel files or SharePoint lists that are used and appropriate for use as data sources for self-service, but they're not appropriate moving on. So they will do the data engineering work to get the data sources in line. They will complete all of the documentation that is required for their standards, and they will define well-known or well-defined owners for the business side, the technical side, the support side, and then finally, they'll put it into a production workspace that is owned by the BI team. They will train their support resources to support it as another official application. It'll have an SLA. It will be part of the IT team's portfolio, even though the application was originally developed and refined and maintained by a business user. This data culture says IT and business work in partnership. This is one of the patterns for collaboration in that partnership. And Microsoft does this too. the slide here, this is one that I stole from somebody else's deck at Microsoft. I stripped out all of the numbers because I honestly don't know if the numbers are under NDA or not. But this is a slide that in our executive briefing, so if you were like a leader from a big company and you came to Redmond to talk to the product owners and the people from Microsoft at a strategic level, if my team is talking to you about Power BI, we'll probably tell this story about how Microsoft Finance 10 or 15 years ago had this real cowboy culture. So Microsoft has always encouraged this individual ownership and initiative so everybody can solve their own problems. You're smart, you're empowered, you've got the technology, you've got the data, you've got the know-how, go solve those problems. But if you have, let's say, 100 finance directors that are all solving or each solving the same common 4 or 5 finance problems, you're going to end up with 100 or 200 different solutions, and they're not going to be consistent. There's going to be redundancy, and there's going to be overhead. And the center part of the slide, talking about challenges in reporting and analytics, what I saw as a Microsoft employee during this time frame was that most meetings would begin with somebody putting up a slide on the wall with numbers on it. And then everybody else, and it's like, wait a minute, those numbers don't look like my numbers. Where does this come from? Are you sure that's right? And then, the efficiency just wasn't there. I won't tell the story because I assume that you've lived through those meetings too. The important part of this slide is that Microsoft has developed a strategic approach to BI that we often refer to as discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge, where there is some data, and very often this is what would be at the top of the pyramid in the first slide or the center of the rings in the second slide. This is the data that needs to be correct and current all the time because we're making business and financial decisions based on it. It's being reported out to the Securities and Exchange Commission as part of our financial reporting. We're sharing it with external and internal partners. The numbers always need to be right. So this is really tightly managed, and there is a large team that's responsible just for the right taxonomies and hierarchies and values. This is probably the most tightly mastered data at Microsoft. But even if we just think about the internal use cases, on a daily basis, there are tens of thousands of employees at Microsoft working with this data every single day, and it needs to be disciplined. But at the same time, those tens of thousands of users, they each have their own use case. This is where the flexibility at the edge comes in, where each user is empowered to build their own reports, their own pivot tables, however they want to work with it, and to bring in other data that isn't part of this managed core, so they can do that additive self-service. But everybody knows that you don't change the data that's in that disciplined core. And if you are reporting data that is part of that disciplined core, you never bring in your own numbers instead of using that. And our executive sponsor, sort of going back to that very first part, has put in place all of the rules and has built this culture that everybody knows this and everybody understands what is expected and what is allowed. And as we move from the easy part to the hard part, I'm going to take a quick drink, and then we'll talk about the actual hard stuff.
Hi, thank you very much, Matthew. Very interesting so far.
Thank you, sir. And I have not seen any questions come in chat. I've seen some chat, but I haven't seen any actual questions. Have I missed anything, or am I good to proceed before I answer questions?
No question, just a few exchange between the participants, but no specific question.
Beautiful. That is what I thought, and it's great to see the conversation as well.
Definitely.
So the hard part is people. So easy part's technology, the hard part is people. Because people are always hard, right? You never know what a person is going to do. So instead of like with technology, with code, you write the code, you give it the instructions, and with a reasonable degree of certainty, you know that it's going to run in the way that you wrote it, right? People are different. So instead of being able to say, this is what you're going to do, very often it's a matter of putting in place the right structures so that people more often than not choose to do the thing. They choose to do the thing that you want them to do, that is the right thing to do based on the goals of the data culture. And two of the most important parts of this approach are having a center of excellence and having a community of practice. The Center of Excellence is a focused group of stakeholders from both the BI and IT teams, like the people that own the technology, and all of the business groups that are using the technology. So this will be like the people that own the systems, the people that own the processes, the people that manage the teams. They are decision makers, so you've got the right people involved in the conversations. You don't always need to escalate to get the answers and to have people act on them. And the Center of Excellence needs to include the people with the budgets that can provide funding for the activities that are appropriate. And very often, the Center of Excellence, because they are the experts on the Power BI and related data technologies, and the experts on how those technologies are being used and need to be used across the organization, having them all together means that this becomes the nucleus of the broader community. This is where you go to when you need solutions to problems. They're the people that you go to when you need to understand how to do a thing that you need to do. And the broader community of practice basically is everybody who works with data or who works with data tools like Power BI. This could be a finance analyst that might need help. Excuse me. It could be a finance analyst that might need help writing a DAX equation. It might, or a DAX formula. It might be someone with solutions, like answering those questions on an internal community site or Q&A board or Slack channel or Teams, wherever it happens to live. And typically that community also includes the moderators or stewards who are either part of the Center of Excellence or closely aligned with the Center of Excellence, to make sure that when a question gets asked, there's always an answer, there's always the right information, and to make sure that as the patterns in questions emerge, like, oh, everybody's asking about this thing, maybe we should put together a lunch and learn or office hours or a session at our internal user group to get the answer to this common question out proactively to more and more people, in addition to updating our internal FAQ or frequently asked questions with the information for the questions that are coming up more regularly. So the pattern here is basically the Center of Excellence is responsible for the successful use of Power BI across all of the business units that are in its scope, hopefully the whole organization. And it includes the strategic stakeholders, like decision makers from all of the groups that need to be involved. And very often it is funded, at least in part, by that executive sponsor. The Center of Excellence provides the resources and the location for this broader community, and then traffic gets driven relentlessly to that community so that people are going into the right location where we have the resources and where there are both people with questions and people with answers. And at this point, this may be feeling like it is above your pay grade. So as I mentioned at the top of the session, odds are if you're attending a Power Saturday event, you are probably not someone that is going to be having a big input into your next fiscal year planning, where you're going to be able to fund this and you're going to be able to tell people, go do these things now. This is your new priority. I'd say maybe you are. Odds are you're not. Odds are you are someone who might work in or work with that Center of Excellence, but the ability to take the actions that are necessary for success is not something that most individuals can effectively do on their own. This is where having that executive sponsor, someone who has your back and someone that truly believes in and supports your work to make these changes, this is why it's so important, because it's not something that you can do in the technology. It is behavioral changes that you need to drive across the organization. It's the people changes that make a culture. So with that said, there are two things that are most important or very important to get that center of excellence and community of practice working together effectively. One of them is having a portal. And it doesn't matter what technology you use. The most common thing that I see is customers that are using either Yammer or Microsoft Teams as the location for this community. This is where their portal lives. But I also see people using Discord and Slack, and a couple that are using Jira, which seems strange to me. People have like custom SharePoint portals or a third-party community-centric portal platform. The technology doesn't matter. What matters is that everything that you produce, whether it is training, whether it's guidance, whether it's help resources, or whether it is links to the data and the reports and the other actual data assets, you put everything that people need into one location. And when this isn't possible, you put as many things as you can get that people need, and you put it into as few locations as possible. The key thing here is that in an ideal world, people will find the things that they need to do their job with data in the location where they're already working. And honestly, this is why Teams is a more and more viable and appropriate location for this, because more and more organizations, at least the ones that I work with that are heavily engaged with Microsoft products and services, everybody's using Teams anyway. There's more and more stuff that is going into Teams. So if you have a Teams site that has all of these resources that your Power BI community of practice or analytics community of practice, if you use tools other than Power BI as well, build that team site, put the resources in there, and make sure that everybody knows that it's there. So in my role at Microsoft, I get at least 4 or 5 emails a day, like random people, because we've got a lot of employees, random people asking me technical questions. And I don't answer a single one of them, because if somebody emails me and I give them an answer, they're going to email me again, and I can't scale to do this. So when someone emails me with a question, I say, go to this portal. My team has already set it up. It has a community of thousands of people just like you and technical experts, like dozens and dozens of technical experts that could answer this question. And if you go and ask there, I'm going to see it and I might answer it there. But odds are when you ask it, there's going to be people jumping in with answers and with help and with links to resources, and you're not bound by my inbox and my schedule. So thank you for emailing me, but no, I won't answer this data flows question. And I feel bad when I do this because I want to help, but I know that giving these people answers in reply to an email or any direct message, it's not helping them. It might feel like help today, but it's going to make their job harder in the long run. Instead, I am helping them strategically by taking them to the location where there are resources that will help them, and there is that community in that one portal. Really, really important. Direct your traffic there. The other aspect to making this community of practice successful as you build the data culture is motivation. And it's hard to know what makes people tick. Every person is different, but based on a variety of research, I stole this data, or I stole the diagram rather, adapted the diagram from a Psychology Today article focused on adult human motivation. And there are three primary motivators for most adults. And those are skill variety, where I'm not doing the same thing in and out every day. It's more motivating to have more variety in your work. There are task identity, which is essentially saying the work that I'm doing today, I know where it fits into the bigger picture and the impact that it's making. That's inherently motivating, right? And then the third one is task significance, where the work that I'm doing is making the world a better place or making someone's life better. This is what might inspire someone to take a lower paying job at a nonprofit that's doing good work. And there are two amplifying factors in addition to these three core intrinsic motivators. One of them is autonomy. So if I get to choose what I do or when I do it or how I do it, that's better than getting micromanaged and told exactly what I need to do and how and when. So autonomy helps. And the other thing that helps is feedback. So if you tell someone, good job, this thing is great, or if you tell them, this thing that you just did, it wasn't great, maybe here are ways to improve, both that positive and the negative feedback so that people understand how their work is being received, this is another amplifier. So in practice, you can apply these by listening, by paying attention, to find places where you or your team could help others succeed, where you might connect someone with a problem to someone with a solution that's great for both of them, and to consistently say thank you and to mean it when you say it. So in one of my internal communities at Microsoft, I'm going to call out Chris Finlan, who is the program manager who owns paginated reports and a few other things in Power BI. So Chris Finlan is my absolute hero for these internal communities because he is one of the most actively engaged answerers. You never need to ask him to help because he's just there doing the work. So on a regular basis, I will say thank you to Chris, and every once in a while, I will copy Chris's boss on this to really showcase the impact that Chris is making. And you better believe it, that when you say thank you and you make sure that people understand how much their contributions are valued, they are more likely to make those contributions and to continue to be a constructive participant in your data culture moving forward. I'm going to wrap up with a few quotes. And generally, I don't like to read slides. It's like I want to tell a story, right? But for these quotes, I actually want to read them verbatim because I think they have more impact this way. So this quote is from John Gall, who is an expert on complex systems or systems complexity science. And this was a quote that was like on the inside in the introduction of some software engineering textbook that I read another lifetime ago when I was in university. But John Gall states, a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse proposition also appears to be true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work. And you may be saying, well, this isn't about data culture. You're right. This is about complex systems. But you better believe me when I say data cultures are complex systems, right? So the takeaway in my mind is you need to start small. And there's two main approaches to building a data culture. One of them is top down, where there's an executive sponsor driving things from the beginning. Starting small is probably making changes in the business area that is most important in the short term, or that can have the biggest results with the smallest investment. If you're part of a bottom-up effort, starting small might mean doing the work where you are already working and then communicating your success to other parts of the organization, but definitely don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to do everything at once because it won't work. And as John Gall suggests, it cannot be made to work. Sun Tzu is a different type of expert on systems complexity. So he was a legendary Chinese general thousands of years ago. He wrote a surviving work called The Art of War. And one of the sayings, or one of the strategic guidance that he provides, is that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And this is really important because it says, if you know where you're going, if you have that strategic goal, even if you don't know how to do it today, you don't know how to get there, you know where you need to go. The rest of it you'll figure out as you go. But if you don't know where you need to go, if you don't have a strategic alignment or strategic direction in which your data culture needs to grow, all of the action today, you're just running around like a headless chicken, right? You're acting, but you're not moving towards an actual goal. So the takeaway here is that as you are taking action towards building a data culture, if you don't have a clear idea of what success looks like, stop or slow down and spend the time understanding the goals and where your strategic direction should take you. Because if you don't know the destination, you can't get there. And every step that you take before you know the destination is probably taking you in the wrong direction. In summary, there is no one path to success because every organization has a different starting point, a different destination, different resources, different constraints. It's not about saying, do these things in this order. It's about saying, understand these are the factors to take into consideration as you come up with your plan. And please rest assured, I am going to share some links with more prescriptive guidance than this, but think about the need to get from one side of the river to the other. That's your data culture journey. But whether you are at a place where it's very deep or very shallow, whether the shores are close together or further apart, that will change the steps that you need to take and the resources that you need to get from one side to the other side. And keep in mind as well that this will change from time to time. The river that is slow and gentle today may be whitewater tomorrow or next year. And I'm going to put this slide up here. I want to mention, in addition to some of the official documentation and content that Microsoft has made available, on my personal BI Polar blog and YouTube channel, I have a 17 video series and another 20 or so articles that don't have supporting videos on this topic. Today's session was sort of the high-level summary of what is roughly a 3.5-hour video series that's publicly available on YouTube today. Definitely encourage you to check it out there. And I also want to mention that I'm currently working with MVP and author Melissa Coates, who is the primary author working on the Power BI Adoption Roadmap, which is a new set of guidance from Microsoft on exactly this topic. So how do you get from where you are to a more successful state with data culture and the adoption of Power BI? So it's coming later this month. We're going through some final reviews over the next couple weeks, but really excited to know that this is right around the corner. We will share the slides, but for right now, this is the time to have the Q&A. And I noticed that Isabel asked, how do we find this magical sponsor? The short answer is look in finance. The second answer is you need to work up your food chain, your reporting chain or organizational hierarchy to find the right people. But odds are, let me actually step back and come back in here. So Isabel, you are a Microsoft MVP. Microsoft recognized you and gave you this most valuable professional award based on what you're already doing today. So you blog, you have videos, you're active in the community, you organize conferences, right? Wow, these are the behaviors that we look for in an MVP. We found you and we gave you that award. Microsoft did. take this pattern and apply it to finding an executive sponsor. So the executive sponsor is someone who believes in the proper use of data to drive business decisions. Odds are there is some senior executive in your organization that is doing this sort of thing already. And if they are, you can engage with them or engage with someone on their team to talk about where they want to go beyond this to get them engaged in the efforts that you want to involve in as well. So this is, again, no easy answer because people are the hard part and executive people are hard in other ways as well, but find them based on what they're doing today. And, oh, yeah, okay, so first step, become the CEO. That might be a bit of a challenge, but yeah, it could work. Let me know how that one goes. So
That's not me.
so this is the session, and this is, I think, the end of Power Saturday, at least for this track. It's the beginning of the day for me, so I now have all sorts of fun waiting for my Saturday. But I want to say thank you so much for joining and for the questions and the interaction in chat. Really, really appreciated it, and I'll hand things back over to the moderators to wrap things up at the end of the day. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for being part of it. And it was a great session. I think everybody reacted to the session relating to the content and realizing that they had some experience related to that. And actually, earlier today, I had a session with someone explaining how she introduced Power BI to a small company and how they took it up and changed from paper reporting to big dashboards on screens in the factory. Yeah. So, and they all appreciated it, and they could all interact with the data, and they really it changed a lot the way they saw things, and they discovered also some expensive assets that they directly recycled to invest in other things. So it was really definitely a culture change beneficial.
Yeah, and one of the things that YouTube video series that I mentioned at the end, one of the videos is focused on the art of the possible, and this isn't a topic that I mentioned deliberately or mentioned explicitly today, but it sounds like that story that you just told, a big part of that cultural change was showing the business people that needed to fund it, like that executive sponsor, because someone funded those changes, letting them know what the modern technologies can do. Like Power BI blows your mind if the last time that you looked at reporting, it was SQL Server reporting services or Cognos or what have you. And just focusing on that art of the possible so that everybody knows what is easy and what is possible to be done, it's really, really important and really impactful.
Definitely.
That's really true. I had a customer, and in the COVID situation, executive asked for a report, and that's the way they gain the Power BI story in the company.
Yeah, and one thing that I heard from quite a few large organizations. So when the lockdowns began, so over a year ago, when the pandemic was beginning, in these executive or senior stakeholder conversations that I was having, I would ask them, how is COVID affecting your business? Like not just IT, but how are you doing things differently now that the world has changed? And I heard again and again that they were accelerating their investments in digital transformation, in self-service BI and data culture because of these changes. Part of it was because you can't walk down the hall and give somebody a paper report, but part of it was also that the business inefficiencies that until the pandemic started, they were like, this might not be great, but it's good enough. Everybody was scared. No one knew what the economy would do, whether or not we'd be here in a year. So because of that, external factors that the business couldn't control, Again and again, I heard people tell me that they were focused on identifying and eliminating inefficiencies in their data supply chain and the business processes that could benefit from data because of the external factors of COVID making it more important. And anytime there's like a big economic downturn, I see the same pattern playing out.
Very good. All right, thanks again. I think we don't have any questions, but a lot of thank you definitely from the audience. We appreciate very much definitely the presentation and all the different stories you told us. All right, well, so I'm going to stop the recording of this session and we are going to let you go and enjoy your day.
I will indeed. Thank